You walk into any bookstore, and what do you see in the self-improvement section? Just tons and tons of books about habits, right? It feels like every year there's a new one that promises to be the secret to unlocking a better you. And honestly, it's a really seductive promise. The idea that if you just have the right system, you can totally reshape your life. So today, that's what we're going to do. We're going to deconstruct that promise, starting with a mega bestseller and going all the way down to the brain science and philosophy behind it all. And this idea, right here, from James Clear's massive hit Atomic Habits, is really our launchpad. It's such a powerful call to action, right? It suggests that we have way more control than we think. But, how do you actually become the designer of your own life? Well, it's not about just trying harder or having more willpower. It's about having the right blueprint.
So let's start right there with that blueprint. The reason Atomic Habits became such a phenomenon is because it took all these complex psychological ideas and just boiled them down into an incredibly practical, super straightforward framework for change.
Now, the core idea is deceptively simple. Forget about massive, radical transformations. Clear's whole argument is that these tiny, almost invisible improvements, just getting 1% better every single day, they compound over time, and that leads to absolutely extraordinary results. It's kind of like compound interest for your personal growth. It totally flips the script on the idea that you need some huge burst of motivation to make a change. And here's the how-to part. Clear breaks down the entire process of forming a habit into these 4 simple laws. If you want to build a good habit, you make the cue obvious, the craving attractive, the response easy, and the reward satisfying. And get this, to break a bad habit, you just invert them. That's it. It's basically an operating manual for your own behavior, built around this fundamental loop that really governs everything we do. But this isn't just, good advice he pulled out of thin air. It's a system that's built on a solid bedrock of behavioral and cognitive psychology. And understanding the science that makes this whole blueprint tick is super important. So let's peel back the layers and look at the psychology behind these laws. Okay, so the first law, make it obvious, taps directly into this really powerful psychological concept called an implementation intention. So instead of a vague goal like, oh, I'll work out more, you create a very specific plan. When my work alarm goes off at 5 p.m., I will immediately change into my gym clothes. See the difference? You're not banking on motivation anymore. You're literally programming your brain to automatically fire off that new behavior when it sees a specific cue in your environment. So how do you make a habit attractive, especially a habit you kind of hate? Well, this is where the Premack principle comes in, or as most of us know it, grandma's rule. It's so beautifully simple. You just link something you have to do with something you want to do. The promise of that fun thing, that dessert, acts as the motivation to get through the less fun thing, the vegetable. Now, Clear builds on this with a clever strategy he calls temptation bundling, and there's a really subtle but important difference here. With the Premack principle, the reward comes after the task. It's sequential. But with temptation bundling, you do them at the same time. You bundle the action you want to do with the action you need to do. So you're only allowed to listen to your favorite podcast while you're at the gym. It makes that difficult habit instantly more attractive. So we've got a practical plan, and we have the psychology that makes it all work. But this is where our little journey takes a really fascinating turn, because hiding under all of this practical advice is a question that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries. I mean, really think about it. When we say we're building a habit or performing an action, what are we actually talking about? This question takes us way beyond the how-to of self-help and right into the fundamental nature of what it means to be a human with agency. Are we really the ones in control? Now, for most of us, the answer feels pretty obvious. The standard theory and philosophy lines up with our everyday common sense. We have beliefs, we have desires, those things form intentions, and those intentions cause our actions. My desire for coffee, plus my belief that there's coffee in the kitchen, causes me to get up and make some. Simple, right? Well, maybe not so fast. It turns out that this standard theory is just one of several competing ideas. The event-causal view is what we just talked about. Your thoughts cause your actions. But then there's the agent-causal view, which argues it's not just your thoughts, it's you, the whole person, the agent, who's the real cause. And then you've got the volitionist view, which suggests it all starts with this pure, uncaused mental spark, an act of the will. The point is, the very definition of what it means to act is very much up for debate. So we have a practical guide sitting on top of psychological principles, which themselves are sitting on philosophical assumptions about what an action even is. But what happens when that scientific bedrock starts to show some really serious cracks? This is where our story gets super complex. This comment from a discussion on Reddit just nails the problem perfectly. best-selling pop science books, they present findings as if they're settled facts, written in stone. But science is a process, right? It's always changing. And what looks like a huge breakthrough one year can be seriously questioned or even totally overturned the next. The audience gets that exciting snapshot, but they don't get the follow-up notification. And in recent years, psychology has been going through what's called a replication crisis. It's this kind of startling discovery that the results of many foundational, even famous studies just can't be reproduced by other scientists. Now, this doesn't mean all those ideas are wrong, but it does mean that the evidence we thought we had is a lot shakier than we realized. And this has a direct impact on how we think about habits and agency. Take ego depletion, that popular idea that your self-control is like a muscle that gets tired. It's a cornerstone of so much self-help advice, but it has failed to replicate in major studies. And then, even more profoundly, you have neuroscience experiments, like the famous Libet experiment, which found brain activity signaling a decision before the person was consciously aware they'd even made it. This has led some people, like the psychologist Daniel Wegner, to argue that our feeling of conscious will might just be an illusion, a story our brain tells us after the action has already been set in motion. Okay, let's just pause and take a breath here. We started with a simple, practical framework. We dove into the psychology behind it. We even questioned the very philosophy of what it means to act. And now we've seen that the science itself is shifting under our feet. So where on earth does that leave us? I mean, this is the question that's just hanging over all of this, isn't it? If the science is wobbly and the philosophy is debatable, are books like Atomic Habits just built on a foundation of sand? Is this whole project of self-improvement just misguided? Well, the answer is a lot more nuanced than just a simple yes or no. The great strength of a framework like Atomic Habits is its incredible usefulness. It takes all these big ideas and turns them into a plan that actually works for a lot of people. But it's not perfect. Critics point out that it can put too much emphasis on individual responsibility, kind of ignoring huge systemic issues. And yeah, it's largely written from a Western individualistic viewpoint that might not fit for everyone. So I think the real takeaway here is this. We shouldn't just throw out the tools because our understanding of how the machine works is incomplete. A framework like the 4 laws is like a map. It might not be perfectly accurate, and the landscape it's describing might be changing. But if you're trying to navigate your own behavior, an imperfect map is infinitely better than having no map at all. The key is to just use it with a little bit of critical awareness. And all of this leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. We use these tools of self-improvement to build a future self, right? To become some better version of who we are today. But if the scientific story of who we are, our consciousness, our free will, our agency, is constantly being revised and updated, what does that mean for the person we're trying to build? Now, that is a question that goes way beyond any single book.